This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hey guys, I'm here with a video showing you how I made the Chronal Accelerator from my Jingle Tracer cosplay. To start off, I traced all of the pieces of this pattern that I drew up, which is available on my store Envy and Etsy, onto EVA Foam. This black piece of EVA Foam is about 4mm thick. This is what a majority of the pieces are made of. I would say it's a majority, at least. And to figure out the different thickness of the pieces, you're just going to really just want to reference a reference photo and kind of look at the different variation between the levels and the pieces when it comes to like where they sit in comparison to one another, or how thick the edges look in comparison to some of the other edges, and it will give you a rough idea. However, most of this is made up of EVA foam that's like about the same thickness. Wow, I couldn't speak there. Anyways, this foam is 6mm, that gray foam that you just saw, and then this blue foam I believe is also 4mm. Once I had all of the pieces cut out, I went ahead and used a heat gun to better shape the pieces that needed to be more rounded or the pieces that needed to curve. So these are the pieces that are going to frame the inside or circular pieces of the chest piece, and then the piece that's going to look like a peppermint on the back piece. To better round out and shape that peppermint piece on the back piece, I cut in some darts and then glued those darts shut. This just helps curve the foam a little bit more. And right here I'm just cutting out the circle in what's going to be the center of the chest piece. You'll be seeing me use a Dremel off and on throughout this entire video, and that's because every time something needs to be glued to another piece, or I kind of like finish a section of the chest or back piece, I go ahead and Dremel everything to make sure all of the edges are smooth. And I just do this repeatedly as I'm working on everything to make sure everything's staying smooth as I go along, so making sure that I don't miss anything that may be hard to reach later after everything's glued together. So you just kind of want to keep that in mind. You don't want to glue everything together and then Dremel everything at the very end, because some places are going to be really hard to reach and may look a little wonky if you wait till then to Dremel. Now I'm cutting out a few more pieces on 2mm EVA foam, and these pieces are what's going to be the stripes on the peppermint back piece. Make sure everything is fitting, I pin them into place on the peppermint piece, make sure everything fits with a tiny little gap in between each section, and then I glue that all into place. And I'm using contact cement to glue everything together, however hot glue will work too. Once those pieces are glued on, you're going to want to cut off any leftover or excess foam hanging off of the edge and go ahead and just sand down that edge again to make sure everything's nice and smooth. And here I'm just gluing on some more details to some more of the various pieces of both the chest and back piece. This purple foam right here is 2mm EVA foam. Here I'm gluing the very center into place for the chest piece. I use a soldering iron to carve in various details, such as the swirl details and any of the details on her armor where it looks like there might be a bolt or something there. Basically, you want to look at her reference photos to figure out all the little details on this that you may need to add. And then it's back to gluing more things into the places they belong. However, here you're going to see me pause for a second because I realized I need to sand down the edges of that piece and I hadn't done it yet. I didn't realize until about around now-ish. And I'm also using 2mm EVA foam to cut off some more smaller details. There's like little bolt-like things on her armor piece or her chest and back piece that needed to be glued into place. Like, that's what you see me gluing here, basically. So basically, you want to pay attention to those very little details and mimic them to the best of your abilities. 2mm EVA foam is usually really good for this. It's really cheap, affordable, and you can afford to like make mistakes with it and just kind of like glue it where you see fit. Anyways, yeah, so just continue gluing everything together and make sure you sand as you go along. Right here, however, I take a pause to cut out what's eventually going to be the clear film that gets glued into both the center, back, and front of her chest and back pieces. And yeah, I just cut that out. That was that clear film, or I guess it's not clear, it's like blue colored, but it's transparent. That film is a transparent folder binder separator thing that I found at like the dollar store. Now I'm gluing on all of these small little edging detail her chest and back piece have. And to get these, I use 2mm EVA foam and I cut them to be about 1/4 inch thick. And then I just cut however long of EVA foam scraps I had and glued them together to make like entirely like one long strip as I went along. Basically, you don't need to worry about it to be the length you need it to be just the width you need, because you can always just stick EVA foam strips together. be sure to sand around all of the edges after you glue these little tiny strips along the edge into place. These white pieces of EVA foam were about 5 millimeters thick, 5 or 6. I'm pretty sure they were 5 though. And again, they were just some more details that I just cut out real quick to glue into place onto the back piece. They just were like 2 stacks of squares. Who knows why it's there? It's just there. That's what her design is. She has 2 squares stacked on top of one another, placed at like, I think it's the bottom or the top of her chest piece. Anyways, I'm continuing to sand and glue things together to try to make everything finally be completed. One way to help both sides of both chest pieces, or both the front and back, be even with each other is to hold the sides of the pieces up to the prop and then trace around it so that you know where you're going to glue it in place once you glue it into place, and you know from planning it out beforehand that it's going to be even and balanced. I'm using 2mm EVA foam to add in some more details. So here I'm just kind of using scrap pieces and basically like piecing them together like puzzle pieces to make sure that they're even and they're filling in these gaps and these small details that I needed to be on this piece. So like it was nothing exact or that I had planned out. It was a piece I almost forgot about, and I just took some scrap 2mm EVA foam and started gluing that where I needed it to be, and then cut off the excess and sanded it down. Anyways, once that is all done, I'm finally done. All the pieces are glued together and I can move on to priming these pieces. I primed both of the pieces, both the front and back, with a couple layers of wood glue. It was about 3 to 5 layers, and in between the layers, about like 2 layers in, like 2 layers of wood glue in, I added Bondo's spot putty and gap filler to any of the seams that were really visible, because there was a few really visible seams that needed to be a bit more smoothed out, and that's what I used. And then I continued to prime it with wood glue after I had sanded it down. Anyways, once that's done, it's time for painting. Back then, when I made this piece, I didn't really use a paint primer on my pieces. However, I would recommend that you do. It will make the painting process so much easier. I just skipped to painting straight away, and it's totally fine. It just might take a little bit longer to get through this step. What you want to do is totally up to you. Anyways, I started by applying all of the green paint first. I'm using acrylic paint for this entire piece, and just like a normal paintbrush to apply it. It takes a couple layers. I'm pretty sure I applied maybe about 5 layers of the green paint before it was fully covered and you couldn't see any of the dark EVA foam underneath. Once the green was done, I moved on to the gold. I used gold acrylic paint to paint all of the gold pieces gold, and used a very, very small paintbrush to paint the edgings gold. And again, this took several layers until it was fully covered. Then I painted gray onto the back piece in the areas where it needed to be before moving on to the candy cane stripes or peppermint stripes that this piece needs. So the white and then the red is what I apply next. Again, they take several layers before they're fully opaque. Once I had all of the base colors down, I coat everything with a clear coat of glossy spray paint and then move on to shading. To shade this piece, I used black oil paint. And I use a couple different paint brushes to blend it out. Black oil paint, or oil paint in general, is very, very easy to blend. It doesn't dry fast at all. In fact, it takes a couple days to dry, so you can tweak it as much as you want in pretty much as much time as you want before it's like set in stone, I guess, or permanent, or you have to like go back and paint over. Anyways, it's really hard to mess up is the point, and you have a lot of time to work with this paint, which is why it's so great for shading. Now I take that blue transparent plastic folder from earlier, the pieces that I had cut out of it, and then glue those into place using contact cement. I'm also gluing on some of the final details, and that is the bell at the top of the front of the chest piece and the bow, which I found at like the dollar store and just kind of modded a little bit to make it look a little bit nicer and more like the reference photo. Before doing any of this, I should note that after shading, I also applied another clear glossy top coat of spray paint to seal everything in place and keep it in place. And I'm using hot glue to attach all of these pieces because I found that to be the easiest way to make everything stick, because the contact cement did not like this fabric. I sewed up these belts with some brown fabric that had a leather look to it, or something as similar as I was going to get at this time. And I used that to make the belts basically. And then I glued the belts into place using both contact cement and hot glue, and then added stick-on Velcro to various belt pieces as like the closure. That's what was going to act as the closure for this. It worked out pretty well. However, stick-on Velcro does eventually peel off, so it did need to be replaced in the future. And then finally, I'm doing like some of the last few pieces, just following reference photos to figure out what I need, and that is some brown leather looking like armor pieces that come off of, I believe this was the back piece. And to do that, I just covered some 2mm EVA foam in the same brown fabric as the belt, and then used hot glue to glue that fabric down, and then used hot glue to glue it in place onto the back piece. I also used EVA foam to create the buckles as well and painted them gold. And that finishes up this piece. I hope this video was helpful and you learned something new that, again, will help you. Anyways, thanks for watching. Have a lovely day. Stick around for future videos or to check out other videos from this series, and bye!